Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program produced and funded by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Ralph Eisler.
And I'm Heath. This is a show that promotes rational thinking rooted in scholarship and science and free from supernatural beliefs.
This is a call-in show. However, we only have one phone line. So if you can't get through, we invite you to tweet them to us at FFTVKNOX. Now, while we go over a few announcements, we invite you to start calling in now at the number on the screen. Get a pen and paper, and we'll give you our email address later in the show.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery. Tonight's meetup is at West Hills Flats and Taps on Kingston Pike. Look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing up on the table. And as Mike Delaney, at Atheist Experience, says, everyone is welcome at our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, or punch, please do not.
The Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. The first and third Sunday meetings are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussions. The book club meets on the second Sunday, and the reflections group often gets together for a potluck lunch on the fourth Sunday. Unfortunately, our reflections group isn't running right now. Maybe in the future we can get it going. Anyhow, visit our websites for additional details, including times and locations.
Our main topic today is God, the most unpleasant character in all fiction.
So before we get into that, let's just talk about a few items in the news. We wanted to comment on a story that's not exactly right up to the date news except for parts of it, but it's a story that's simmering in the background that none of the television news programs seem to be willing to touch, but which should be of greatest concern for most Americans and for secular people in particular, namely the steady crawl toward a theoretic state under the Trump administration. We know that without the support of 81% of fundamentalist Christians, Trump would not have been elected. He's well aware of this fact, and he's going out of the way to pander to their desires for societal control. We know Trump was successful in getting Neil Gorsuch appointed to the Supreme Court, and we haven't yet seen how he may rule on cases involving separation of church and state. But his nomination was enthusiastically supported by the religious fanatics.
A Senate panel has been considering Trump's judicial nomination of Amy Barrett to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. Barrett is a controversial Catholic Notre Dame law professor who once seemed to suggest that one's religious beliefs ought to take precedence over the U.S. Constitution. She clerked for the late Supreme Court Justice Scalia. The Alliance for Justice, a progressive judicial advocacy group, called on the Trump administration to withdraw Barrett's nomination in July because of her past writings on the role of faith in the courtroom. The organization also objected to her views on the matter of stare decisis, or the doctrine of legal precedent. In an article she co-wrote with John H. Garvey entitled Catholic Judges in Capital Cases, Barrett criticized the Supreme Court justice who once testified that a judge's oath is to the Constitution alone, and it should only be used to govern how they rule from the bench. Barrett wrote that was not a proper response for a Catholic judge, and with respect to abortion or the death penalty.
Yeah, and so what do you think about that? I find that absolutely horrifying that this woman who has been nominated for this position would think that her religious beliefs should override whatever the law is.
The law of the land.
Now, I don't know where her nomination stands right now. I don't know whether she was confirmed or whether it's still pending.
I don't know either.
Or not. But anyhow, along these same lines, and
if you, I'm sorry, let me interrupt just for a second.
Fine.
I mean, if you would assume for a second that she was Muslim,
Yeah.
would she make the same statement about Sharia law?
She might.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to kind of put a different lens on it in different ways. It's like, okay, do you want this person to come in here as a constitutional expert?
Yeah.
And rule on the law of the land and try to help us guide us as a country? Or, I mean, if you take any person and put them in that kind of situation, you cannot divorce them from their personal experiences. I mean, that's I mean, it's impossible.
That's true, but I have to say that, several of the justices on the Supreme Court, which I think now are 6 Catholic and 3 Jews, don't interject their personal opinions, I think, overtly into these cases, like Scalia did, like the guy she clerked for. He had much the same opinion, I think, that, that the religious views had their place and could supersede the law in some cases, although he was not so overt about saying it.
Right.
But anyhow, we'll have to see what that happens. In sort of the same vein as this kind of creep towards theocratic justice system, in Alabama, Roy Moore, who was the ex-Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, seems poised to be elected to the Senate. Moore was stripped of his position for asserting his religious beliefs that they superseded the statutory laws. He was involved, if you remember, in this big 10 Commandments monument, a
Right.
huge 20-ton stone or granite monument having 10 Commandments that he had installed on the courthouse ground, and he was told it was unconstitutional, and he refused to budge, and was finally stripped of his position as a Supreme Court judge there. But he still hasn't changed his mind, and when he gets to the Senate, he won't. He won't be a judge, but he will nevertheless bring those same judicial feelings to the Senate. Anyhow, the thing that is more up to date here and makes it look like it's getting scarier and scarier is Attorney General Jeff Sessions recently issued new guidance across the government aimed at giving religious individuals and groups broad protections to express their beliefs when they come into conflict with government regulations, including when making hiring decisions. What do you think about that? I mean, you can, it allows people to discriminate in their hiring. If they don't like somebody who is gay or a lesbian, just on that basis, they can discriminate.
Well, I wonder if that conflicts with the equal opportunity laws. I mean, the federal government has EO laws and regulations and rules.
Jeff Sessions says those do not apply to LGBT people, that they were instituted specifically for blacks, for racial discrimination, and that they do not apply to LGBT people. Okay. Sessions goes on to say, except in the narrowest of circumstances, no one should be forced to choose between living out his or her faith and complying with the law. I just can't believe an attorney general would make that statement. He says, if your faith tells you that you should go out and murder somebody, that's okay. All you have to do is say, it's one of the tenets of my faith. I mean, I'm exaggerating.
I know, you're being
course.
extreme, but still.
But nevertheless, this is a horrifying idea. Anyhow, the Attorney General wrote, to the greatest extent practical and permitted by law, religious observance and practice should be reasonably accommodated in all government action, including employment, contracting, and programming. That means that they could deny a contract, for anybody who is not a fundamentalist Christian to build a government building, something like that. It just opens the floodgates for discrimination of all sorts. And to go on in this vein, for example, the directive that Sessions issued says the Internal Revenue Service may not enforce the so-called Johnson Amendment, which prohibits nonprofits from intervening in a political campaign on behalf of the candidate. In cases involving religious nonprofit, when the same activity would not be enforced against a secular organization. This means churches will be free to spend their hordes of money that they put into political campaigns without being taxed. Now, they can promote candidate all they want right now. All they have to do is say they will give up their tax exemption. And they can do it. But that's not what's going to happen in this case. You can bet on that. Yeah. So that is complete discrimination against everyone who tries to participate in a political campaign outside of a religious base.
So instead of changing the law, which would be very difficult to do, he just says, here's some laws, we're just not going to enforce them.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's what they're going to try to get away with. So this sweeping and pandering to religious fanatics could impact a series of pending political decisions involving health care, LGBT rights, and even disaster relief. They opened the door to creating a spate of new Jim Crow laws, allowing the religious right to deny basic rights to anyone who does not fit into their narrow system of tenets. When the federal government says religious beliefs supersede our laws, then our very system of democracy is at risk. To all our viewers and listeners out there, we hope you write your government representatives. Every time a case like this comes up, keep in touch with them and fight to keep separation of church and state. Okay, well, got my rant in about that. So why don't we go on to main program? We wanted to talk about God, the most unpleasant character in all fiction. And in a moment, we'll get around to where that idea came from. But I want to say that first that I've been reading kind of an interesting book called Fantasyland by Kurt Anderson. It deals with how the lines between fantasy and reality have been blurred in the American populace from earliest settlers today. But the lack of distinction has become truly severe in the last couple decades with the emergence of social media and a government more concerned with providing perception rather than fact to its citizens. In the past, as an individual's fantasies did not seem to make a huge impact on society as a whole. But we knew this had turned a corner when Karl Rove, George Bush's chief strategist, commented to reporter Ron Suskind that people in the reality-based community believe solutions emerge from judicious study of discernible reality.
Which makes sense.
Which kind of makes sense. It's what most of us have been brought up to believe. But Rove went on to say that's not the way the world really works anymore. We create our own reality up here. Up here meaning in the White House
Right.
or on Capitol Hill or what have you.
Right, and I think that sort of goes along with the, I guess, platitude that perception is reality. And that,
Yeah.
I mean, in people's minds.
There is a subjective reality for most individuals. I will admit to that. But there's also an objective reality which should pertain to all individuals. Okay, well, we have a phone call. So, yeah, press on. Hello, caller. You've reached Freethought Forum. Do you have a question for us? And can you give us a name or a nickname?
It's Charles in Central Illinois.
Oh, hi, Charles.
Hi,
How
Charles.
are you?
One of the factors I've noted among the religious people is the insistence that everybody else must conform to their standards of conduct.
Yeah.
But they have a tendency of not wanting to obey them themselves.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, in the epistles of Paul, it states that marriage between a man and woman is forever unless there's fortification. And given the number of so-called true Christians that have been caught committing fornication, mistresses and affairs and so forth, and yet their marriages are still valid,
Mm-hmm.
it seems as though there's a great deal of hypocrisy behind a lot of this.
Yeah. Just this last week, there's a representative from Pennsylvania who is a strong anti-abortion proponent. And he has had to resign because he had a mistress, and when she got pregnant,
He asked her
he
to get
was
an
trying
abortion.
to get her to get an abortion, to get rid of it. I mean, that's the absolute height of hypocrisy.
And then
Oh, yes.
his response was, I didn't write those I didn't write those policies. I didn't write the things that supported the anti-abortion policies. I just published what my staff did. I mean,
Yeah.
he actually
That's-
said that.
And then went on national television and local television announcing that this is the moral and proper thing to do. I wonder
Yes.
if he's editing his memory there.
Yeah, and almost every day you can find some article. We don't always know how to tell what's true or what's not, but almost every day you can find some article on the web about some preacher has been caught, in child abuse somewhere or another, or having sex with underage kids or minors. The hypocrisy just goes down the line. Now, I'm not saying that the majority of good Christians are hypocrites in that sense, but there's enough embedded in the religion that you know that it has to be weeded out before the religion is ever going to become something that we would want to embrace.
Well, there are some good things in the Bible. There's also some very bad things. For instance, God's morals, which is today's topic as I understand it, seems to be rather flexible in regards to who can do what.
Yeah.
For instance, all this talk about abortion, yet this is because it's against God's will, but this is the same God that stated to Moses that, all those pregnant women that you took captive, since they've known a man, you've got to kill them,
Mm-hmm.
which has a tendency of killing the unborn child, too.
Well, that's what
We seem to
the
notice that.
this is supposedly when the Hebrews moved into Canaan and tried to conquer the local tribes there. God told them to kill all the boys and men, rip up the pregnant women, and keep the young virgins for yourself as sex slaves.
Yeah. And yet this is supposed to be the God that created the Canaanites in his image, just like he created the Hebrews in his image.
Yeah.
So God's morals seems to have a reflection of whatever happens to be in the best interest of the person that's proclaiming them.
Yeah. Well, that's of course that story is a fictitious story. The Israelites actually were Canaanites who grew up around 1200 BCE and finally wanted to form some sort of a coalition to fend off other invaders. And they decided one of the best ways to do it was create a fictionalized story about being captive in Egypt and then moving into Canaan, etc. So, but nevertheless, we understand what the thinking is of the God that they created.
So the concept of a divine being having morals is interesting, since the divine beings have a tendency of ignoring their own proclamations.
Yeah, and this gets back to the old Euthyphro dilemma, Socrates, where basically the dilemma is, does whatever God says make it moral, or is there an external set of morals that God chooses from?
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
I believe he stated as, is it moral because God says so, or is God moral because, or is it good because it is moral?
Yeah.
So,
right.
So the concept has beleaguered theists and philosophers and everybody else since day one that we started thinking about these things.
Yeah, and of course, once you really start thinking about them, and especially in the Bible, you realize that it's really whatever the tribal elders or the priests say is moral.
Right, whatever they can say to convince the population to follow them.
Whatever works for population control, which is basically what religion is about.
Yeah, it's a very, very dangerous subject because, for instance, in the Bible, there is no age of consent for women anywhere.
No, I think not. And we even see this in the Islamic countries today that, little girls 12 years old, maybe some even younger, get married off to older men.
I think there's a congressional representative said that rape and child bride marriages are not immoral because they're in the Bible. That God has no problems with it. You're supposed to hand out 50 shekels of silver if you rape somebody and she has to marry you.
Yeah, sure. And the woman, of course, is considered property. Right.
Yeah. And but when you point out these kind of things to theists, especially Christian theists, they get all bent out of shape, saying, "Well, that's just the Old Testament." Well, so is the killing of gays, Mr. Roy Moore.
Yeah.
He's so fond of.
Yeah.
Christ made absolutely no mention of anything about homosexuality.
No, he did not. And there's some people who even intimate that wandering around in the desert with 12 other men sounds a little gay.
And a prostitute.
Yeah, well, we don't know about her for sure. But, yeah, I know, Charles. This is the hypocrisy runs rampant.
Yeah. Especially the conflict between what Paul was teaching and what's in the Gospels. Because Paul said the law does not apply to me. And Christ Jesus, in one of the epistles to somebody, said, yes, the law is still valid.
Yeah.
So the heaven and earth passes away.
Yeah, we have all of that discussion in our program, actually.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, it's funny because I'm like, okay, we're hitting that point and that point. This is good. This is good.
Okay, Charles. Well, we're glad you called in here, and
Okay.
I think we're going to go on and talk a little bit about some of the things that were pointed out in this book called God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, by Dan Barker.
Yes. I'm a fan of Mr. Barker.
Okay. Well, thanks for calling in, Charles.
Bye.
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 Okay. Well,
That was a jump down.
yeah, that's.
Oh yeah, I've got that.
So we're going to pick up back on our program
Right.
here. We had a long conversation with Charles, and he sort of
It's a nice
touched
little
on
outline.
a lot of the stuff that we
Yep.
have in our program here too. So go ahead.
So, so picking up where Ralph left off, the last thing he said was a quote from Karl Rove about how we create our own reality.
Yeah.
We being the White House.
Yeah.
So we have seen how thoroughly this view has infected the government with a blizzard of alternate facts emanating from the White House over the last several months. From the obvious lie that Donald Trump's inaugural crowd was largest ever to his characterization of honest reporting of his actions that he doesn't like as fake news. We see a political party crafting a fantasy land for the gullible. But in fact, the fake news is created in the White House. And I just want to talk about fake news just for a little bit.
Sure.
So fake news is not new. I mean, fake news is actually a really old term.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, I mean, if you look at the real definition of fake news, it's more than propaganda. Like, honest to goodness, fake news is a lie. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's something made up that has no bearing in fact to misdirect. I mean, you're intentionally lying.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever you look on the internet and Google about fake news, a lot of people are saying, well, no, that stuff, what they're saying is not fake news. And there's a lot of people that say, well, President Trump has his own definition of fake news. And that is, if he doesn't like what's being said, it's fake.
Yeah.
It could actually have some bearing in fact. He just doesn't like what's being said, and he's calling it fake news. So an interesting effect there, that the definition of fake news is in fact a lie intended to be a smokescreen or misdirect. You know, if you think of it in terms of warfare, it's psychological warfare is what it is. And him calling it fake news is in fact saying you're lying. Whereas they're saying, oh no, he's not saying you're lying, he just doesn't agree with it. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
so now we have these multiple definitions of fake news.
Which is kind of fakey itself. So anyhow, why does the administration get so much support among the American electorate? I suggest that if you're programmed to believe fantasies in one aspect of life, such as religion, you're prone to accept bad ideas in other areas of your life. You can't expect someone who believes in the magic world of gods and demons to exercise critical thinking when it comes to politics. Belief becomes more precious than truth in all aspects of life for such people. It's telling that Trump was elected because he received 81% of the evangelical vote. So nowhere is this disconnect between reality and desire to believe seen more clearly than in the evangelical's affirmation that everything in the Bible is literally true, and his description of God as a loving spirit, that is the source of freedom. The Bible is the sole basis for the Christian God, Yahweh. In fact, many Christians claim it is this God who actually wrote the Bible. So let's see how he portrays himself.
In the first sentence of the God Delusion, Richard describes Yahweh as follows.
Yeah, that's Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins, yeah.
I left the word.
The Jewish tribal God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, whom the Christians worship, is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential plagues, megalomaniac, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. It's a lot of big words.
That's a lot of long adjectives there, isn't it? Right.
Dan Barker, co-chair of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, took this as a challenge to write a book titled God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, devoting a chapter to each of Dawkins's adjectives and adding a few of his own. So we're going to talk about some of these to pinpoint the God's character in his own words.
Yeah. So why don't we talk a little bit about jealousy? That's Dawkins' first adjective. Let's start with the first commandment, so-called first of the Ten Commandments, which Christians love to put up there, especially Roy Moore, our Ten Commandment guy. Says the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Now, first of all, this is an admission that there are other gods, but Yahweh is very jealous of them. So to elaborate, the second commandment basically prohibits Jews from making idols and worshiping them. Yahweh goes on to state in that second commandment, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punish the children for the iniquity of their parents into the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. I mean, this sounds like a petulant kid whining about any opinion that don't flatter him. We've already gone over some of that type of discussion.
It's like, Yahweh is saying the other gods are fake news.
Yes, that's what I was just going to point out. When you talk about fake news, all you have to read is, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. That's the quintessential fake news, probably. That's a different topic for another time, though.
But what I find interesting with this one is God's jealousy is enough to make him angry.
Yes.
Just that alone.
Yeah.
So,
Jealousy begets anger. I think so.
Right. So, I mean, we'll just in the realm of the Ten Commandments, we'll throw the other 9 away. We'll just, jealousy.
Okay.
No other God before me.
Right.
Everything else is fine. No other God before me. So, I mean, you worship another God, I mean, there were zillions of gods back then, and I don't think anybody worships those other gods at large. There may be some
anymore.
small religions. I mean,
Yeah. I don't know. There's still some Zoroastrians
Okay,
around,
Zoroaster,
I think, or
okay.
something like that.
Mhm.
But you're right.
Right.
Other religions have almost disappeared.
right. So when you see these cases that we're going to talk about a little bit later about how God is angry with these people because they are not following the law,
Mhm.
this alone is enough
Yeah.
to qualify.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
right. Exactly.
Not murder, not
No.
theft, not envy, not the other law, just,
No,
I'm not your
it's-
God,
it's
so
me,
kaboom.
me. That's what
Right.
it's all about.
Right.
And
There is no other way.
there is no other way. And this is one example, but Barker goes on. He lists 21 other examples where Yahweh goes on to describe himself as jealous. This is pretty unflattering for an adult. It's more adolescence as far as I can tell. And
Well, I mean, if you think about it from the point of view of these tribal elders
Mhm.
trying to control their people, it makes perfect sense.
oh, sure it does. In
mean,
in that case,
yeah.
exactly. I agree with you.
If you're constructing a religion and you want people to stay on the straight and narrow, you're going to, rule number one, this is it right here.
If you go look up on the web something like Christian moral beliefs or something like that, all the ones I have looked up, they say their first belief you have to have is God comes first before anything else. Okay? And that is a real way of maintaining population control.
Sure,
So
absolutely.
I just don't see how people can sort of buy into all of that. But I tend to think religions exist only because people cannot deal with their mortality. They can't deal with the fact that someday they will disappear. They will die. I don't see any other reason for it. If you take that reason away, there's absolutely no reason for people to participate in religion.
I think back in the tribal times, I mean, you've got all these bad things that are happening, famine,
Oh yeah.
natural disaster, and people looked at the elders and said, why?
Yeah.
Well, here's why. I give you an answer. If I don't give you an answer, I'm not going to be legitimate in your eyes. So here's the answer.
Yes, I think, and I've said this before in this program, that once people became aware of cause and effect, I mean, many years ago when modern humans were just starting to emerge, then they wanted to explain natural phenomena in terms of cause and effect, but they couldn't control it. Like they could control their shelter and their clothing and things to keep warm or produce food or grow agriculture. And so they invented superhuman or supernatural beings that could do that. And that's what I think the source of religion is.
God of the gaps.
God of gaps. Okay, well, it's about time we take a mid-program break over here.
In case you're just tuning in, this is the Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions. We would like to thank DW specifically for sponsorship of this episode. Shows are live most every Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Community Access Television. You can also see it streaming online outside the Knoxville area. Just go to ctvknox.org.
Okay, well, this is a call-in show, and we're live today, October 10th. And viewers can call in now to the number on the screen or tweet your comments to us at FFTVKNOX.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets 2 times a week. We have meetups. We have evening meetups for fun, food and drink, and conversation. ASK's purpose is to supply a venue for community camaraderie and outreach to atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and other like-minded persons in East Tennessee area.
Okay, well, we're going to run a little short promo video here for you now, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. If you live in or around...
Okay, well, let's see. The Rationalist Feast Tennessee has Sunday activities involving lively presentations and discussion of subjects topical and timeless. Once a month, we get together for a book club. You need not have read the book to attend, but of course it helps.
Both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee help provide a social outlet where you can find that if you don't believe in God, you are not alone. So we'll get back to our program.
Yeah, okay. Well, we were going through a few of these adjectives that Dan Barker has elaborated on following the long sentence that Richard Dawkins wrote in his book, The God Delusion. And one of them, we just talked about jealousy, but one of those is unjust. And we finished up the last time with talking about the second commandment, rather, where God says, I'm a jealous God, punishing the children for the iniquity of their parents into the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. Now, that is the most gut-wrenching thing I think I have ever read. I can't imagine that anybody in this country, even Christians, would try to put that in the law.
Right.
That you can punish your grandchildren and great-grandchildren for the sins of their grandfather.
I think that many people that have trouble with Christianity will find there are many passages that unduly punish children. We've got several, there's just lots of them,
Mm-hmm.
mostly as collateral damage.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we just touched on one when they supposedly Hebrews moving into Canaan, they were supposed to kill all the males. Didn't matter how old they were, anywhere from newborns up to old men. Just killed them all.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, God's an equal opportunity killer here. I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and a couple more passages on this. This is one from Hosea 13:16. The people of Samaria must bear their guilt because they've rebelled against their God. They will fall by the sword. Their little ones will be dashed to the ground, and their pregnant women ripped open. That goes into...
Yeah. And then Exodus 11:4-6.
Yeah.
Thus saith the Lord, about midnight I will go into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the maidservant, and all the firstborn of beasts.
So God, in order to punish Pharaoh's going to kill all the firstborn Egyptian children. I mean, this is just out and out capricious bloodshed, gratuitous bloodshed for no reason at all. But of course, that passage forms the whole basis for a major Jewish holiday, for the Passover.
The Passover.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
The Jews actually believed this happened. Fortunately, it did not. but it just goes to show the type of thinking that went into the religious life of those ancient Hebrews.
Right.
So,
We have another example here in 2 Samuel. David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said to David, the Lord has put away your sin. You shall not die. Nevertheless, because this deed you have utterly scorned the Lord, the child that is born to you shall die.
now
So
does that make any sense?
it makes no sense.
It makes
at
no.
all.
It makes no sense except for a psychopath of some sort.
Right.
I mean, that'd be interesting. I never thought of that. Turn the Old Testament over to a good psychoanalyst and see what he would come up with.
Yeah. But, I mean, there's other instances, like, we were talking earlier about Jericho. And it's like, okay, we're just going to go in and kill everybody. I mean, everybody. I mean, like I said, children are collateral damage. And one of the reasons that the Bible gives for killing the people of Jericho is that they practiced child sacrifice. They killed their own children. All right?
Okay.
They threw them in fire and they killed them as to appease gods or whatever. Okay.
I don't remember that part.
Yes.
It's been a long time since.
It is. So the things that the people of Jericho did that were bad were worshiping other gods, homosexuality, bestiality, child sacrifice. I'd have to look at the list. Anyway, there's a list of about 6 or 7 things.
Yeah.
And when I was reading that, what struck me was here are one of the things that are explicitly called out as one of the sins of the people of Jericho. Yet in cleansing Jericho, he's killing all the kids in Jericho.
Okay, it's in Jericho.
Right.
Yeah. That's sort of a non sequitur. Right?
It's like, okay, if the people in town do it,
yeah.
it's a sin and it's human sacrifice. But if God goes smash, you're all dead. That's
he
not.
kills them all.
That's okay.
Well, that's interesting. I guess I hadn't read that part for so long. I forgot about that. But that's a good point. That's just incoherent, isn't it?
It is completely incoherent. And coming from a religious background myself, we as adults, we would read these passages and go, "That's atrocious." Okay, so this is the Bible. This is our religious minds trying to reason through this. Why in the Bible? Why is this in the Bible? Why is this cited as an example of morality?
Right.
What is the lesson here?
And this is why you have to have such an extensive cottage industry of apologetics.
Yes.
To explain
Absolutely.
all of these things.
Absolutely. And one of the arguments was that, you will be punished through the 6th and 7th generation. We've got a phone call.
Okay.
Was that these children would take up the mantle of their parents.
Oh, yeah. Okay, caller, you have reached Freethought Forum TV. Do you have a name or a nickname you can give us?
Yeah, I'm faithful for it. Are you hearing me? I've got a headset on that's a little different this week.
We can hear you, Forrest.
We can hear you.
Great. So, I heard you talking about how the Hebrew God told Moses' people go in and kill all the women and children. And that happens more than once, but certainly an instance where it's kind of detailed happens in Numbers 31. And so I guess the kind of question to you is, and forgive me if you did mention it and I missed it, how many little boys were killed during the episode that was in the slaughter of the Midianites in Numbers 31? Do you guys know that?
No, I might have it somewhere here, but I don't have it at fingertips.
Well, of course, Yahweh's book didn't say, oh, well, and we killed the following number of little boys, but you can make it this inference. It's from Numbers 31, verse 35, where
Okay.
and 32,000 persons in all of women who had not known man by lying with him. This was the booty. In fact, verse 32 says, and the booty being rest of the prey which the men of the war had caught was, 600,000 and 70,000 and 5,000 sheep. Okay, so they're listing all the sheep they caught. But they kept alive 32,000 young women.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we all know that for every female born, there's about one male born. And so if these are women, young women, children, that means they killed 32,000 little boys, their brothers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. That's a good analysis. I can believe that might be true. Or, I don't really believe that part of the Bible at all, but I can believe that that's what the story would be in the Hebrew religion.
Yeah, that's a fair inference.
Yeah.
Statistically.
Yeah. And I should give credit where credit is due. I didn't come up with this. This is an observation from Robert Ingersoll.
Ah.
His book, Some Mistakes of Moses. All right. Well, let me keep on going on with the show. And thanks for taking my call.
Well, no, I'm glad you made that comment because I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah, it puts it in perspective.
At the time.
Yeah, 32,000. How many little children are there in Knoxville?
Boy, I don't know. What's the population in Knoxville? It must be 300,000 or something.
Like that.
Yeah, so how many children are there?
Yeah.
So think about it.
Okay.
All right, let me let you go.
Maybe we'll look up some statistics and see. Okay.
Right, thank
Thanks
you,
for
Forrest.
calling, Forrest. Yeah. God seems to demand blood sacrifice everywhere. There's blood all over the Bible. I mean, blood is a big thing. We think maybe of the Mesoamericans being bloodthirsty with human sacrifice, and they were more than anyone else. But boy, it seems to me that the Old Testament comes pretty close to having as much blood there as you might find on a pyramid in somewhere in Mexico. Anyhow, he really can't seem to think of any other way to expunge sins or to sate his anger or his jealousy or his fury. Even in the New Testament, he has to slaughter his own son, who's really himself in a human skin somehow or another. Yeah. That's the only way he can think of, to get people to behave better.
Right, yeah, the thought of human life, well, actually, so the sacrifice mostly was animals and stuff in the Old Testament. It wasn't, human life, but, when you get to the story of Jesus, it's human life.
Yeah, exactly.
But still, somebody's got to die.
So anyhow,
there's a note here about how in Exodus, talking about taxation, everyone over 20 shall pay a tax of half a shekel. The rich and the poor will pay the same tax. So it's equal opportunity, whether you've got a bunch of money or not. And so I looked into what a shekel was, how much money is that.
Yeah.
And I went to a Jewish website. Because they were talking about the Jewish
Yeah.
law, because they still do this, they still have this tradition of this tithe or contribution or whatever it is.
Yeah.
They do it annually. And there are people sort of debating what the value of a shekel was, and it ranged from like $5 to $100. Here's this thing, in today's dollars.
In today's dollars.
Yeah. And, is that unreasonable to ask the people of that time, regardless of your economic situation, to make that sort of annual contribution? Like, okay, let's pick worst case, $100.
Yeah.
Would it be terrible for every individual, every one? So it's every individual over 20. So every individual adult had to pay $100.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like a bunch of money. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck, and $100, that's a lot of money.
Let's ask ourselves, what would that amount to in some of the economies in Southeast Asia?
Sure.
Where people are working for pittances, barely able to keep alive. They wouldn't be able to pay that. We'd put that comment in, that was under the heading of unjust, and we talked mostly about killing people who had committed no crimes,
Right.
but this just goes under the same heading, that it seems to be very unjust that the poor person might have to pay his whole livelihood while the rich person could just slough it off. It's like buying a lottery ticket. I mean, you know, I could go buy $20 worth of lottery tickets if I want. And I say, well, it's not going to impact me much. But the person who is making $7 an hour, you know, and has a couple kids at home, that's a big sacrifice for them. And unfortunately, too many of those people probably have too much wishful thinking on it. I don't know. I shouldn't say that. But I'm just making the contrast that, you know.
And just to take this just a little bit further, even if you went to the cheaper side, $5, the whole point of this money that was given to the temple wasn't for like maintenance. It was to buy sacrifices.
Oh,
It was to buy animals to kill.
Yes.
So it's like, okay, we're going to tax all you folks. We're going to take your money, and we're going to buy animals, and we're going to kill them.
Yeah. Again, this comes back to blood sacrifice, right? The God demands blood sacrifice. Yes. The trouble is that eventually it got to be that the only place you could really sacrifice was in the main temple in Jerusalem.
And you had to buy them
and you had
at the door there.
At the door. And you had to have them slaughtered and then killed and leave them behind. And who got the meat? The temple priests. I mean, those are the ones that were profiting off the whole business. What a big scam.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, we don't have too much time here, but do have another adjective or pair, control freak. He's got a control freak. Exodus 22, it says, whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord must be destroyed. Now, there's no religious freedom there.
Yeah, that goes back to jealousy.
Yeah, it goes back to jealousy. And we should make the point that, you know, those early Israelites, they were polytheists. This god, Yahweh, only evolved first to be first among gods. That's what we saw in the first commandment. And then only later to be the only God. And so there, unfortunately, are a lot of fundamentalist Christians in this country who would probably like to make this the law of the land. That Christianity is the law of the land. And in Isaiah 45:7, this is one of my favorites. I am the Lord, there's none else. I form the light and create the darkness. I make peace and create evil. For I, the Lord, do all these things. But God says he creates evil. So, unfortunately, we have come to the end of the line here, haven't we? And so we only have about a minute to go. It's time to start wrapping things up, so get out your pen and paper.
This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
Please send us feedback. Leave voicemail at 865-272-9060 or email us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
You can see this show most Tuesdays from 5 to 6 p.m.
Sometimes we are preempted by the beer board meetings. We don't know exactly when they come, so you'll have to just tune in and see. Anyhow, our thanks to Sam and for Faithless Forest and technical help from all the staff at CTV, KNOX, and to all our callers.